Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. We start today's video with a story that answers an important question. What happens when someone keeps taking what isn't theirs and dares you to stop them? But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. How I cured my neighbor's chronic parking spot theft. Several years ago, when I moved into my first apartment, I was assigned a specific parking spot. It was clearly marked right next to my building, and for the first few months, I had zero problems using it. I parked there every day without thinking twice, like a normal person who assumes assigned parking actually means something. About 6 months in, new neighbors moved in. They had 2 old beat-up cars, and at first everything was fine. Then one day I came home and one of their cars was sitting in my spot. I figured it was a mistake. It happens. I knocked on their door, explained politely that the space was assigned to me, and they moved it. Except it kept happening. At first it was occasional, then it became frequent. Then it escalated into something truly baffling. They would park one car in my assigned spot and the other in one of the prime spaces closest to their apartment, while their actual assigned spot sat completely empty. It was like they were doing it just to see if they could get away with it. This is never about the parking spot. It's a territorial probe. By leaving their own spot empty, they were making a statement. The rules don't apply to us, and your convenience is less important than our optional comfort. It's a power play disguised as laziness. I spoke to them multiple times. I stayed calm. I explained the situation again and again. Eventually, they stopped pretending it was accidental and flat out told me they weren't going to stop. Management was slow, unhelpful, and basically useless, so I was stuck coming home from work to find someone else comfortably parked in my space. One night, I snapped. I came home, saw their car in my spot again, and decided that if they were going to be disrespectful, I could be creative. I ran upstairs and printed out a truly shocking, over-the-top image paired with a giant, bold message claiming the driver had a contagious condition. Nothing subtle, nothing classy, maximum embarrassment potential. I taped it directly over the license plate. Here's the key detail. The car was backed in. I knew she wouldn't see it when she left in the morning, and from what I'd observed, she liked to park front and center at work where everyone walked past. The brilliance is in the delayed discovery and the change of venue. The humiliation wasn't private, it was exported to her workplace, her social sphere. You turned her own preference for a conspicuous parking spot into the stage for her consequence. The message wasn't on her car, it was on her reputation. Sure enough, she drove all the way to work with it still attached. According to neighbors, she was hysterical when she discovered it. People at her job saw it. She was asking around trying to figure out who did it. Interestingly, she never once asked me. And the best part, for the remaining months I lived there, she never parked in my spot again. Not once. Sometimes polite conversations don't work. Sometimes management doesn't care. And sometimes the only thing that gets the message across is a little well-timed anonymous humiliation. And our next story. My boss's ego cost him everything. When I first started working as a subcontractor, I didn't think much of it beyond the paycheck. At the time, I was transitioning out of plumbing, which I'd been doing for years, and this seemed like a decent enough way to stay in construction without being stuck in the same narrow lane forever. The setup was simple on paper. A realty company would buy distressed or outdated houses, and a licensed contractor would coordinate crews to go in, fix everything up, and make the properties rent-ready as fast as possible. That contractor, who I'll just call contractor, was the one we all answered to. My coworkers and I did the actual labor. We gutted kitchens, repaired drywall, replaced fixtures, handled plumbing issues, flooring, whatever needed to be done to flip the houses efficiently. The realty company never dealt with us directly. Everything flowed through contractor, and at first I assumed that was just how things worked. The transition wasn't easy at the start. Plumbing had been my comfort zone. I knew it inside and out. This job required broader skills and faster turnaround, and for the first few weeks I definitely felt out of my depth. But I learned quickly. I paid attention, asked questions, stayed late when needed, and gradually became someone contractor could rely on to handle entire houses without being babysat. That's when I started noticing his personality more clearly. Contractor had a reputation, and not a good one. He yelled constantly. Painters, plumbers, drywall guys, nobody was immune. He'd scream about prices, timelines, how long things were taking, how much he wasn't paying for this or that. Sometimes if you squinted hard enough, you could almost understand where he was coming from. Deadlines matter, budgets matter, but the way he went about it was pure ego and intimidation. It wasn't constructive, it was just loud. What made it worse was that the numbers never lined up with the outrage. Contractor loved to brag. According to him, he was pulling in easily $2 million a year. Whether that was true or inflated didn't really matter. What mattered was that he'd lose his mind over differences of $50 or $100 as if those amounts were make or break. I watched him blow up long-standing working relationships over pocket change, then complain later that nobody wants to work anymore. The tantrums over trivial amounts weren't about money. They were about dominance. The performance of outrage was a tool to keep everyone off balance and justify his control, making his subcontractors grateful for any crumbs he didn't scream about. I'd been working for him about a year at that point, making $16 an hour. For my area, that wasn't terrible. I wasn't rich, but I could keep the lights on. Still, I knew the math. I was making him far more than the $160 I earned on a 10-hour day. I could flip 2 houses a week by myself if everything went smoothly. Each one netted him thousands. Meanwhile, I was counting gas money. The first real crack in my patience came during tax season. Everyone else got their 1099 forms without issue. Mine never showed up. When I asked about it, contractor claimed he'd lost it. The first time I gave him the benefit of the doubt, stuff happens, but every time I followed up after that, he got pissed. Not annoyed, angry. Like I was personally attacking him by asking for paperwork I legally needed. He'd snap, tell me to stop bothering him, and walk away mid-conversation. That didn't sit right with me. Still, I kept my head down. I worked harder. I figured if I proved my value beyond any doubt, he'd eventually recognize it. So I pushed myself. I finished houses faster. I took on extra responsibilities without being asked. I stayed late, skipped breaks, and made sure every job I touched looked clean and professional. Eventually, I decided to ask for a raise. I didn't demand anything. I didn't threaten to quit. I just asked. He laughed. Not an awkward laugh, a dismissive one. Then he shut the conversation down entirely, like the idea itself offended him. That should have been my cue to walk away, but instead I doubled down. I told myself I'd earn it. A few months later, I tried again, this time more diplomatically. I asked how I could be more useful, more productive, how I could help us both make more money. Contractor didn't even hesitate. Get a van and a trailer, he said, then we can talk. The tone wasn't encouraging. It was the same gruff, dismissive voice that meant, do what I say and stop asking questions. But I latched onto it anyway because it was the first concrete requirement he'd ever given me. So I did it. I worked side jobs. I stayed late. I worked weekends. I cut expenses to the bone. There were days I skipped meals just to stretch my cash a little further. I told myself it was temporary, that I would be worth it, and slowly, painfully, I saved enough. By the time I had the money together, I was exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. This wasn't just being tired from work. This was the kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly telling yourself just a little longer, over and over again. Every side job I took, every late night, every weekend I gave up, I justified it with the same thought, once I get the van and trailer, things will change. Contractor certainly acted like they would. He loved the productivity. I could practically see the dollar signs light up in his eyes whenever I told him how much I'd finished in a day. He'd grunt approvingly, sometimes even clap me on the shoulder in a way that felt more like checking a horse's muscles than any real praise. But I took it, because I thought it meant I was getting closer. Eventually, I scraped together just enough to buy my dad's old Ford van. Calling it old is generous. It was a white gas guzzler with faded paint, cracked interior plastic, and a smell that never quite went away, but it ran. And more importantly, it was mine. Not borrowed, not rented, mine. Not long after that, I found a cheap 5x10 trailer that was, frankly, a piece of crap. Bald tires, busted lights, rust everywhere. I spent nights fixing it up after work, wiring new lights, patching what I could, making it functional. Every bolt I tightened felt like another step toward finally being taken seriously. The following Monday, I pulled into the job site with the van and trailer hooked up behind me. I remember that moment vividly. The sun was barely up, the air still cool, and for once I felt proud instead of anxious. I walked up to contractor smiling, ear to ear, genuinely expecting something. Approval, recognition, maybe even a good job. I told him to look at my new setup. He glanced at it once and said, "Cool." That was it. Then he got in his truck and drove off. I stood there for a second, confused, trying to process how such a big moment for me could be reduced to a single word. I told myself he was busy, that he'd circle back later, that this wasn't the conversation. Yet. At the end of the day, I finally caught him alone. I brought it up carefully, still trying to stay respectful. "So," I said, "I've got the van and the trailer. I saved up and did everything you said I needed to do to make more money and be more of an asset to the company." He narrowed his eyes at me. "What are you talking about?" I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe he misunderstood. "You told me if I got a van and trailer, we could talk about more money." He didn't even hesitate. "I never said any of that crap," he snapped. "You have to actually work if you want anything else from me." It felt like getting punched in the chest. This wasn't a forgotten promise. It was a calculated demoralization. The goal was never to reward you, but to see how much unpaid effort he could extract before you broke. Your initiative was treated as a threat to his control. I just stood there, stunned, replaying every conversation in my head, every late night, every skipped meal, every weekend I'd burned for this man, and he was standing there telling me it never happened. I tried to respond, but nothing came out right. My brain felt like static. Eventually, I forced out a quiet, "Yes, sir," and walked out of his office. That was the moment something in me finally cracked. I wasn't angry yet, not screaming, not confrontational. I was just empty, devastated. I'd done everything he asked, exactly how he asked. I was finishing at least 2 houses a week, sometimes more, houses he bragged about making $5,000 on. And somehow I was still being treated like dead weight. For the first time since starting that job, I seriously considered leaving. I started looking at job postings, other companies, anything with a hint of upward mobility. That's when the electrician pulled me aside. I'll call him Adam. Adam was one of those guys everyone respected, calm, knowledgeable, never talked down to anyone. If you needed advice, he'd give it without making you feel stupid. I told him everything. The raise, the van, the trailer, the way contractor had flat out denied ever saying it. Adam listened quietly, then said something that completely shifted how I saw the situation. "You're not supposed to climb here," he told me. "You're supposed to learn." I didn't understand what he meant at first, so he kept going, "Learn everything you can, how the jobs are priced, how they're scheduled, how the money flows. One day you won't be working for someone like him. You'll be the contractor, a better one." He told me how he'd worked under contractor for years, dealing with the same crap until he finally got his electrician's license. Now, Adam said, he doesn't decide what I'm paid. I do. If he wants me, he pays my rate. If not, I've got other customers. This was the turning point from victim to strategist. Adam reframed the entire experience. The exploitation wasn't a dead end, but an unauthorized education. The goal shifted from seeking validation to acquiring leverage. That conversation stuck with me. I went home that night and started researching what it would take to become a general contractor in my state. The requirements weren't easy, but they weren't impossible either. Books, references, a bank reference, and passing the exam. The books alone were expensive. Between bills, the van payment, and supporting my family, it felt out of reach. Until I found a local group that needed a handyman for odd jobs, fences, toilets, small repairs, anything. I took everything. Slowly, my name started spreading around town. People talked. References piled up. I was building something, quietly, while still showing up every day for contractor like nothing had changed. And that's when the real plan began to form. By the time I decided to open my own business, I was living 2 lives. During the day, I was still showing up to jobs under contractor, keeping my head down, doing exactly what I was told, and pretending that nothing had changed. I answered yes, sir, kept my mouth shut, and worked harder than ever. On paper, I was still just another subcontractor. After hours, though, I was building something else entirely. I did the research, step by step. Business license, LLC paperwork, liability insurance, name availability, bank references. None of it was glamorous, and all of it cost money I barely had. Every form felt like another gamble, another moment where I could have screwed myself financially if it didn't work out. When I finally sent everything in, I waited and waited. 3 weeks passed before I got the letter inviting me to take the general contractor exam. 3-hour drive, Tuesday morning, $300, which also meant missing work, another obstacle, another test of how badly I wanted this. The first time I took the exam, I failed. Open book or not, I ran out of time. I remember sitting in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, feeling like I'd just confirmed every doubt I'd ever had about myself. I went home and told myself I'd just keep grinding. The job, the side work, the slow climb. A week later, I was holding my son. He was asleep, peaceful, completely unaware of how much I was questioning myself in the moment. I looked at him and thought about my childhood, growing up broke, living in trailers, being hungry, wearing cheap clothes, and pretending I didn't care when kids made fun of me. Wanting things I never got. Experiences I never had. That was the moment I knew I couldn't quit. Not for me, for him. I saved money again, took practice exams, studied every spare second I had. When I retook the test, I passed. Barely, but a pass is a pass. I got my license. And that's when things started moving fast. Over time, I'd become friendly with the owner of the realty company. Not best friends, but friendly. Barbecues, casual conversations, small jokes. I helped out with extra tasks that weren't technically under contractor. Nothing dramatic, just enough to be useful. One day, I saw invoices from contractors sitting on the owner's desk. I didn't accuse, I didn't confront, I just commented. "Wow," I said casually, "that's a lot. You've known him for a long time. He could probably cut you a little slack." The owner didn't say much, just nodded and stared at the papers. After that, I made similar comments now and then, not often, just enough, little seeds. How many houses that money could buy? How much overhead seemed inflated? Never aggressive, just noticeable. Eventually, the owner invited me over for a beer. We talked about nothing important at first, fishing, work stress, life. And then he mentioned he'd had an argument with contractor and that they were limiting him going forward. Before I could ask what that meant, he said, "There's a meeting Friday. I want you there at 9. That was it. No explanation. I barely slept until Friday. When I walked into the meeting room, everyone shook my hand. Some people I recognized, others I'd never seen before. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a regular meeting. This was an investor meeting. Real money. Serious money. We waited nearly an hour before contractor showed up, late as usual, wearing a stained t-shirt and cargo shorts. I was in a dress shirt and tie. He didn't even notice me at first. When he did, his face changed instantly. That, "What the hell are you doing here?" look. The meeting went on for a long time. Budgets, projections, plans. Then the owner turned to me. "I want to congratulate OP for passing the general contractor exam and starting his own business." The room reacted politely. Contractor went pale. Then the owner asked the question, "OP, how would you like to be our new property manager? You'd still run your business, but we'd pay you exclusively to manage and oversee all new and existing properties." The room went quiet. Before I could answer, contractor exploded. "What the F? I've been your contractor for over a decade. You can't replace me with this idiot." The owner didn't raise his voice. "We're not replacing you," he said calmly. "You'll report to him now. All work, billing, and decisions go through OP." Contractor turned to me, red-faced and shaking. "You're fired. Get out." The owner chuckled. "You don't have that power anymore." I shook the owner's hand. "Yes," I said, "I'll do it." Contractor stormed out. The meeting continued like nothing had happened. 60 new houses, full oversight, steady work, stability. In less than a year, I'd gone from being ignored and underpaid to running the entire operation. And the man who laughed at me, he answered to me. Or he didn't work at all. The final perfect inversion. His entire power was built on being the loudest, most indispensable link in the chain. You quietly became the only link that mattered, proving that real authority doesn't scream, it just quietly takes over the room. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.